So hi, my name is Jamie with MyTarot.org, and what I'm doing is I'm reading Dummett's A Wicked Pack of Cards, which is a popular book and one that I kept seeing getting referenced. So on this channel, we've done a lot of tarot history. Me and Michael, my neighbor, doing the Two of Wands, which is our web show. We've gone through spending an hour looking at each of the trump cards, the art history, the meanings, all that wonderful stuff like that. And we went through that, and then we've gone through the pips. We're about to start the court cards. And so in my travels and in looking at all this, I've always meant to read this book because it was difficult to get, it was expensive to get, and I had put it off. But I finally got around to it. So I've already done the first 74 pages, 73 pages. So the first 3 chapters. And so I'm only on chapter 4 as far as the video goes. And so I want to take an hour. I figure the last time I went about an hour and a half, and that's a little bit too long for something like this. It's kind of dense, and so I'm taking my time, and I'm using highlighters, and you can see that I just notate, mark, and I go back. And so it's been a week since I've since I've been to this chapter 4. So this is going to be a review for me, and that's what I want to do, is that I learn by teaching. I learn by reviewing. I've got over 200 videos on the channel here. So this is my chance just to share what I'm getting from this book, and maybe somebody else will get something from it. I'm picking out the meat because I can tell you what, some of this stuff is dry. The authors here, which are Ronald Decker, Thuri Dupolis, and Michael Dummett, they are more scholarly than anything. And so one thing that a friend of mine points out is that they are opinionated. They document, they have footnotes, some things that are occult tradition with the tarot, the history, the beliefs that some people have. If it is not documented, like the Egyptian origin of the tarot and things like that, they kind of blow it all apart with this book. The theory that it was brought across by gypsies, all those things like that. They really question it, and they document it, and sometimes they just don't pull any punches. So I know, they are opinionated. I'm just going to read it as it is and give whatever commentary as we go along. So I'm just going to give that forewarning there, because he definitely had opinions about it. He's more of the occult side. I'm more of the secular side. But I enjoy all of it. So we are jumping into the 4th chapter here, which is Attila, the first professional cartomancer. So it starts right off with, in 1765, the celebrated adventurer Giacomo Casanova was in Russia, near St. Petersburg, at Khartonov. He had an opportunity to buy a charming little slave girl of 13, who he immediately renamed Zaire, and who was soon to become his mistress. Zaire had 2 failings. She was extremely jealous, and she was addicted to card reading. She had a blind faith in what the cards she consulted every day told her. Some weeks later, as Casanova had spent a night out without Zaire, but not without companions of both sexes, he was welcomed home with cries and reproaches. She points to a square of 25 cards, in which she makes me read in symbols the whole of the debauch which had kept me out all night. And that's a weird sentence. She points to the 25 cards in which she makes me read in symbols the whole debauch which had kept me out all night. I saw nothing, but she imagined she saw everything. Casanova did not like it, and threw her cursed abracadabra into the fire. He threatened Zaire that he would dismiss her unless she gave up card reading. So although it is surprising to hear of card reading in such a remote place as Russia, in the hands of a young educated Russian peasant girl. But this is the very first account where we have someone using a spread of playing cards to tell fortunes. We can note that in spite of his great experience in life, Casanova was not really accustomed to it. So 5 years later, a book was published in Paris under the title Attila, and I'm going to skip the French. When it's spelled out in French, I'm going to skip all that and just say Attila, or A Way to Entertain Oneself with a Pack of Cards by Mr. Asterisk. So he writes this book, and again, it's saying here that this is one of the first stories that ever mentioned reading cards. So 1665. I mean, I'm sorry, 17. How long ago did he say? 50 years. So 1720 then would be when the story came out. And in 1770, Attila is writing his story. And he expounds it in a way of using ordinary playing cards to tell the future. So keep in mind as we're reading this, it's not the tarot deck. He comes up with his own pack. And one of the cool things about this book is that I already had the Attila deck. And, I have Marseille decks, and I read Marseille, and I read Rider-Waite, and all this other wonderful stuff. And it's like, you know what? I am not going to branch off and learn a completely different set of cards. And I'm kind of glad I did not do that, because after reading this chapter on the Attila Tarot, it essentially is just his version after he had come up with this through reading de Geblon and de Mellet. So he came up with what he believed was his own version. So there's different changes, different pictures, wonderful things like that. So, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit later. So his book expounded a way of using ordinary playing cards to tell the future. Introduced as a mere entertainment, the process needed a full peak, and I'm going to pronounce it as Piquet. Peak. Is that a peak pack? That is a pack of cards where the lower cards from the 2 to 6s had been eliminated, as was then customary in France for playing the popular game of pique. To these 32 cards, the writer recommended using a 33rd, which he called Attila, designed to represent the questioner. Here, too, the full meaning of the cards was obtained by spreading them in a different way, fan, square, etc. But each card also had a meaning by itself, or rather two meanings. According to the orientation it had when it was laid out. At the time, the French playing cards were not yet double-headed, and the figures were complete. So a card was dealt upside down, it was reversed. So, and here's where they have his a chart of what he's got here for the meanings. And so basically, we hear of Attila. Attila is basically helps to popularize cartomancy, but not the tarot. So with his first book here, he's telling you what the cards actually mean. So king, a blonde man, diamonds, a man, clubs, a dark man, spades, lawyer. Queen, spades, widowed lady, 10 of hearts, town inheritance, diamonds, betrayal, lover, So you have to know the keywords. It's not as you're actually reading the tarot. It is just like a lot of the popular fortune-telling cards that came out subsequently. So, then let's see. It goes on and it talks about that, and it goes into his life and his history a little bit. And again, I'm going to just kind of like skim through to the highlighted parts and just kind of go through that. So Attila and the Tarot, it may well be that in 1781, Attila had a flash of inspiration. This was the year when Court de Geblon published the 8th volume of his Monde Primitif, where he dealt with the tarot, seen as the Book of Thoth. This certainly helped Attila to come back into the field of card reading. The following year, Attila published 2 leaflets. Again, skipping the French version, Instruction upon the Indian's Lotto, which Mr. Attila, teacher of algebra, gives us in 1772. And one of his nom de plumes, one of his, he loves calling himself teacher of algebra. So all through this book, whenever he signs something, he will sign Mr. Attila, teacher of algebra. So 1781, it sparks his interest back up in the actual tarot, but there was something new. The Book of Thoth, certainly, Attila had already heard of the tarot. At the end of the first book in 1770, he lists several methods of fortune telling. And in here, he talks about the tarot, reading tin, reading molten lead, coffee grounds, whites of an egg, where tarot, actually spelled les, T-A-R-A-U-X, tarot, is written in an obviously archaic spelling, which might indicate that Attila was not familiar with the word. So this is still saying pretty much that Attila, up until the 1770s, knows of the tarot, but he's not giving it anything, any high importance. He's rating it the same as molten lead and egg white. So then we go through between 1783 and 1785. Attila produced his master contribution to the esoteric tarot under the title of A Way to Entertain Oneself with a Pack of Cards Called Tarot. So, if Alouette constantly pays homage to, and Attila, his name is actually just spelled backwards. So, Alouette Baptiste, it's his name, full name in here. But he, just for his esoteric side, spun his name backward to be Attila. Constantly pays homage to Court de Gebelin. Neither the style nor the description of the hieroglyphics accord to the court's word. It is a turgid, wordy, confusing work, and that's one of the things that, especially in our day and age when we go back to read anything that's got that kind of a date to it. So that is when he produced his master contribution. And it actually, this book deals more of like a biography with him. So, but here are the correspondences. Attila. So he does the numbering different, again, than what we have with the Marseille. Attila has number 1 as the Pope. 2 is the Sun. 3 is the Moon. So, yeah, so you can see it's like I was all excited to buy this deck thinking originally, years ago or a while ago, that I was going to learn how to read the tarot with this, but it's one of those things where you pretty much would have to dedicate yourself to learning a whole different method. And from what I've seen so far, the Attila method, it's just more of the fact that he helped to popularize it than anything else. Okay, so going through here, Attila's cards. So there's like 3 different versions of his cards. So again, I'm not going to go through all these here. So because you can buy the different versions. I just happen to have this version here. But it was an interesting chapter to read, but again, it's kind of dry. It goes in here, note that Attila's numeral cards, there is nothing particular to Hermeticism. It is therefore abundantly demonstrated that Attila's tarot, the first cartomantic tarot pack commercially available, is largely fed from older French cartomancy, which means, again, assigning particular words. So, compared to the Tarot de Marseille. 7 support, night, day, marriage, dissension. And it's still used keywords and things like that. Which in the corners you can see the words. And when it's reversed. So we know that he changed the numbering, he changed the cards. All that wonderful stuff. And then as we go on. Yes, and so again, he created the first commercial deck that you could purchase. And then we go, although Attila receives little credit in popular literature today, we all hear about him, but I mean, what did I really know if I really looked that deep? I'm sure that a lot of people know a lot more than I ever do. And we have Plain and Practical. Just got here. What is the title of the book? And hello, Chicken Twitch. So I have people on YouTube and I also have people on Twitch. And yes, it is a wicked pack of cards. And for me, some people think it's dry, but I eat this stuff up. It is a really good, well footnoted history of the tarot. So, with Attila, although Attila receives little credit in popular literature today, he can be credited with many firsts. He was certainly first to popularize fortune telling with playing cards. The first to promote card reading as a professional activity, and the first to publish books on the subject. He was also the first to use a pseudonym as a constant pen name, initiating a tradition which was to flourish amongst the 19th century esoteric writers, as the following chapters will abundantly demonstrate. Thanks to Attila, Court de Geblin's theory about the Egyptian origin of the tarot had a wider diffusion, and fortune-telling with tarot became popular. He was the first to attempt to incorporate tarot cards into a system of magical theory. Let's see here. His example, though not his means of doing so, was to be followed by others whose influence would persist longer. Last but not least, he can be credited too with the invention of the very word cartomancy, or rather its forerunner, cartomancy, Cartonomancie. So we have cartomancy, and this is cartomancy, which appeared in his writings in 1782. Amazingly, one of his disciples was about to publish a book on cartomancy in 1789, the first occurrence of such a word in the European language. But as the book is now lost, we can only know of Attila's very critical review, rejecting this quite new and illogical word to which he opposed to his better cartomancy. Nevertheless, cartomancy took hold and its use spread. In 1803, it entered de Wally's French dictionary, and from there it had found its way into almost all European languages. So yeah, to use a pseudonym, his name was Jean-Baptiste Alliette, and he just turned the Alliette back around. So he died on December 12th, 1791, at the young age of 53, which is even in the 18th century, a rather young age to which to die. We unfortunately know nothing of what he died of. Attila was a fascinating character, blah, blah, blah. There's some touches of so that's Attila. Attila was the, one of the touchstones, one of the people that helped to popularize. We have just de Geblin, as we talked about before, and Dummett, where it was in the Monde Primitif. Attila then reads the Monde Primitif, sees the potential, sees people already reading using regular playing cards. And again, it's not the tarot. So, and then he comes up with his own stylized version of the tarot, which we didn't go into because it's, they go into it, but it's more academic and doesn't really propel the story forward. So then we come to Attila's disciples and posterity. So let me see something here. Okay, so this, my friends, you know that I'm trying to really just make sure I read every single word, and you can see I've got my highlighters, I've got my pens, I have a special eraser of happiness. I've got all this stuff. This was one of those chapters, if you're in school, where it's like, please just get me through this chapter, and do I really need to read it? Let me grab my pen and highlighter just in case I have something exciting that I want to notate. So his disciples, Attila's succession seems to have been rather confused, although no will is known ever to have been written. It is clear to all that Attila had nominated one of his disciples as his preferred successor, Millet Saint Pierre. Attila's first biographer has quoted extensively from autograph letters which had come into his hands. These letters from disciples reveal the name of Hugan. So it kind of goes into like this political back and forth. Who is his heir? Who gets his cards? Somebody takes his cards, wipes out his name, and puts his name on it to sell. Again, it's a commercial deck. So there's all this political stuff. Who gets his box of stuff? All this other stuff that you hear about. Again, it's not really moving the tarot forward. Why do I like using the word synonym instead of key? Oh. So again, one of the things in here is that, I'm glad I read this. So, the Synonymic Dictionary of the Book of Thoth. So, I see the symbols on the tarot. And I read, we read. And so as we read, we have synonyms. So if I see sun, what's another synonym for sun? And so instead of keywords, I really like the idea where they brought up in here that his dictionary, he used the word, not keywords, because I am absolutely anti-keyword for teaching the tarot, for learning the tarot, because keywords are one of those things that keep you from being intuitive. If I see justice, what's another synonym for justice? To see clearly, justice. Keywords. It just it just really pigeonholes you. So I like the word synonyms because it makes you think about the fact that these each are almost a word in itself. It's not keywords that you want. You want, because you see a picture, it's because you see the card itself and you want a synonym to match the word or what you actually see on the card already. So that's my little tangent, but I really liked that idea of using the word, and I'm going to do that from now on. I'll clarify keywords is one thing, and I'll actually come up with a better way to explain that, but it is synonyms. When I see a card, I'm trying to understand that card and present it as a synonym of what I'm seeing, not keywords. Faith, hope, charity, those are keywords. But what are the synonyms of the card? Okay, so as we go through, and we're still looking at his all these people that want to claim to be his successors. The Buncheli too had planned to publish a commentary book on the Book of Thoth. Evidence can be found in some of his letters to Attila. In 1791, he complains about the difficulty of interpreting the synonyms. But on 10th of February in de Beaucel, who sends Attila. So again, there are many synonyms whose fortunate conjunctions I have admired. So again, it's just they're going through the writings, the letters that were going back and forth. But again, there is no set. There's no set successor. So transitions and reprints of Vatera's posterity from the 19th century and all this stuff. So yeah, it's just kind of like a dry back and forth. So I thought that part was going to be dry, right? So that was interesting actually a little bit. But I had made a note for myself here. What is this note? This book will now drag on for the next 2 chapters. Some may find it fascinating, but it put me to sleep. So, and why is that? Well, we do talk about Mademoiselle Lenormand, prophet or sorceress. And she was a cartomancer. She's attributed to creating a deck of cards that actually she didn't create, but they have her name. So it goes on, and this is a biography of her because you really can't talk about the popularizing of cards without understanding her. She was her own greatest publicist. She wrote, I think, like 60, 70, 80 books, it'll probably say as I skim through here. All of them not on how to read cards. And again, it's not the tarot per se. She doesn't write about how to actually read cards. She tells you about how great she is at reading cards and how she read cards for Napoleon and Josephine and predicted all these things. So she really was a great publicist for herself. And there is a lot of confusion as to what is true and what is not, because the later biographies actually quote her books. And again, her books are so full of her own story and her selling books. So how much truth there is to it, you balance that out. So yeah, it was dry, but I mean, it's one of those things where you pretty much have to read about her, how she gets arrested, and then she rewrites, she writes her books and then she rewrites her own history in the books. She comes up with so the name Lenormand is also attached to a specifically designed cartomatic pack, the Grand Jeu de Mademoiselle Lenormand, still printed by Gramont, the main French card, based on a 52 pack. It includes 2 extra cards representing a woman and a man, a male and a female. The cards do not follow any identifiable system. It is thus one of the most complicated modern fortune-telling packs. Now, I don't know if that's true because I know people who read it. I've never felt the desire to jump into it, but eventually I'm sure I'm going to have to. Each of the cards displays a central scene surrounded by different symbols. Let me see here. So, but it goes on to say that it's, they created this deck, but she didn't. So more recent packs appeared 1850 under the name Petite Lenormand. Their composition of 36 cards goes on. So, and it talks about her career. She hardly knew the tarot. And as we finally end here, so I should actually highlight this. In the end, Marie Lenormand's career proved to be quite successful. Her very modern sense of publicity and her use of media at the time, circumstantial books, press articles, even adverse ones, not to mention her grandiose burial. She arranged to make sure that she had like this huge burial, has brought her universal fame. She did not design, here's where it is, she did not design or even inspire a pack of fortune-telling cards. She wrote many books, but all were focused on her visions and her historic encounter. She hardly knew what the tarot was and never referred to Court de Gebelin, Attila, and their followers, but the years have not eclipsed her name. She really remains the most famous cartomancer of all times. So she would have been all over TikTok. She would have been all over all the social media. She would have been on Oprah. She would have been on everything else. She would have been the Dr. Oz of our day. So now we finally get through that, and that's a page 142. So we started at 75, and so they spend a lot of time on her biography. And again, I find it interesting enough, but it does drag because I want to know more about the tarot, right? So, Mademoiselle Lenormand's fame eclipsed Atella's. Her renown was far greater than that of any fortune teller before or since, and her importance of our story lies greatly in the greatly inflated vogue for divination to which her celebrity gave a major impetus. Unlike all other fortune tellers who published books, however, she had expounded no theory, nor any technique of divination. Any tradition supposedly stemming from her was necessarily a fabrication. By contrast, though, Attila bequeathed the doctrine, a technique of divination, a set of designs for the Egyptian tarot, and elaborate from Court de Gobelins, an account of their historical origin. From him, therefore, an entire tradition took its source. So, now we're going to jump back into Attila. So we talked a little bit there, and so now we have the tradition of Attila. Cartomantic Pax is what it's called. And yes, okay, so what other side notes do I have? Attila's tradition, Lenormand's importance. Yes. Okay, so, and I'll even share with everybody as I'm flipping through here. Goes into the Egyptian tarot. It talks about the majority of writers insisted, however, that the proper cards to use for the purpose was the tarot, and so there's this going back and forth because again, there were Lenormand using the other cards. There were the peak decks that Attila was using. There's Egyptian tarot cards that finally Attila did come up with and all this stuff. So there's this kind of thing going back and forth, but ultimately it comes back to people are saying that the original tarot is where you really want to go back to. But they're talking about here we have the Grand Attila, and here's where it talks about in depth about these cards. So we have the Grand Attila too. So there's in their fundamental work on fortune telling cards, Delef Hoffman and Erika Kroppenstedt distinguished three principal phases in the evolution of the Egyptian tarots, which they called the Grand Attila 1, 2, and 3. Grand Attila 1 was Attila's own pack and its immediate descendants. Grand Attila 2 came out in 1838, or a trifle earlier, under the name of the Grand Livre de Thoth, and was the work of Simon Basquel, and not the work of Attila, keep in mind, but was the work of that person there. And then Basquel was the publisher at Lilly, who worked in collaboration with his father-in-law, Jean-Baptiste Castureau, produced a great quantity of popular booklets. So they go on about, how they created the Attila II and et cetera, et cetera. So the Grand Attila II was carved on wood and did not diverge greatly from its prototype. The coins had become wreaths enclosing a centrifoil, and in each of the lower panels of the numbers contains a vignette bearing no relation to Attila's interpretation. Among the first 21 cards, 1, 10, 12, 15, and 21 have been completely redesigned. Okay, yes. So here we have Justice is 9 instead of 8. And then we have Temperance. And then 12, what did we do with 12? So 11 is Force, which is Strength. So 12 is Prudence. That's right, because keep in mind that, and we talked about this in the last video. And hello, we have Chicken Twitch. Hola. How you doing? So So keep in mind that, as we talked in the last video, that Attila and other people saw that the hangman was actually reversed, and that it was a guy dancing, and that it was Prudence. So here we see the result of that. 15. 15 is melody. Okay, so have been completely redesigned. The aureola has been removed from cards 1 and 10. Temperance is leading an elephant, which I did not see that here. Okay, so no, this is because I believe that I have the third deck. So yeah, so it goes on that Temperance is leading an elephant. On 12, Prudence is represented. Oh, 10, Temperance is leading. Let me take a look at that elephant. No, it's not. Not on my version. So I've got it. They're talking about the 1. But in this one, it does show that Temperance is holding a snake. Okay. Slithers in her left hand, and on 15, the priest has been replaced by a wizard with a mannequin standing on a table before him. And Egyptian symbols from the looks of it. On 21, the chariot has become a 4-wheeled carriage with a canopy ornated with crescents. And again, this is the third, but I believe it is the same in this one, because I have gone through these before. I didn't like trying to read with them traditionally because it did not work. 21. Chariot has become a 4-wheeled. So, anyway, with canopy ornated with crescents on the carriage's stand, a bearded man, a sinister appearance. The inscriptions at the top and bottom still indicate the significance of each card, upright or reversed, as on the Grand Attila 1, but in addition, each bears at either side another inscription indicating its subject or domination. Neither the trumps nor the suit cards of Attila 1 had names, but only numbers, though Mongi's version had made an attempt to correct that. Grand Attila 2 reverted to tradition in which one respect that it restored the names to them once more. The names given to the suit cards were wholly straightforward. Those allotted to the first 21 cards and the last rendered in English were as follows. 1 is chaos, 2 is light, 3 plants, so it goes on to give you the names. So, but as a sign of interest here, I will show you the plates that were in the books. So here you can see that these original plates here, these are from Court de Geblin's Monde Primitif. And what's interesting about this, as I had already mentioned and we had looked at before, is that he saw this person actually, that the hangman was reversed, and that the card makers had messed that up. And that card makers are horrible people and have no sense whatsoever, apparently. So you can see this person's tied down in kind of like a dancing pose, and that was actually Prudence. So this is from the Monde Primitif by de Geblon. So now we get to look at above and facing cards, some of the original Attila Tarot published in 1789. I'm sorry. And again, when I got my first Attila deck, the one I have, yeah, I got it and I was all excited to read with it. And I looked at this puppy and I'm like, okay. Again, I am not going to learn a whole new blah, blah, blah. But it is interesting, and I do like the pretty pictures. And for those who are interested, here is our subject, which is Monsieur Attila. This is the front piece to his to one of his books from 1790. I'm not even going to attempt the French on it, but that is him hard at work. And then here's the Petit Tella original edition, 1791. And you can see again, it's this writing down of words so that the cards are changed. So it's still not actually reading a true tarot. And then we're just going through some plates here, I guess, in the middle of the book, because here we have the self-proclaimed cartomancer Mademoiselle Lenormand in prison. Front piece from her book in 1822, and yes, she was imprisoned, and she made sure that when she was released, that she wrote all about it, because as she said as she explained, she is a very interesting person. So, okay, so Granditella 3, which is what I have, and they have some examples in here. And in case you want to see an actual photo of Monsieur Levi, who's going to be coming up, again, it's the center of the book. They put all the pictures in the center. That's kind of annoying. And he's the one who, here we have our famous now with the Sphinxes and our Baphomet. And Paul Christian, who we will get more into as we go along. And so, Pappas. So here's Edmund's card. Here's his cards from Pappas. If you've got the Tarot of the Bohemians, what is that called? The Tarot of the Bohemians. I've got that sitting right there. So here he is as a young physician. I think I might have met him at a sci-fi convention from the looks of it. Oswald Wirth. So the Oswald Wirth that I do use, Oswald Wirth was a tarot reader from the 20th century, 1800s, so the 19th century, I mean. And so I love his deck. I really do love his particular deck. So again, we're just flipping through here. We're looking at more cards, the Falconer plates. But then we start reading again more about Attila and going into the tradition. And it does go into, it starts talking about his research into more of the occult side. For Occult Books, 1841, parishioner publisher specializing in occult works, brought out the Red Book by Hortensius Flamel, which was a pseudonym again, which obviously using the name Flamel. So it goes into talking about just the traditions and people coming along, and it goes into, again, more biography of who some of these people were. Again, they were kind of like on the side. They were inspired by Attila, but the one that ends up coming up that I've read about, and I have other stuff on, is Paul Christian, to say that Petoisius, so Jean-Baptiste Petois was a charlatan in his capacity of occultist, is not to say that he was an all-around charlatan. Far from it. He was a successful journalist, translator, and literary man who published nearly 80 books and translations, as well as editing various journals for short periods. He was not a very good writer. His style was high-flown, and his books were often quirky. None of them can have enjoyed any signal success, and neither his real name nor his pen name, Paul Christian, would be likely to be remembered now, but for his contributions to occultism. It's kind of dry as you go through here. Again, it's more of a biography talking about some of these people. So the later manuals, roundly controverting Attila's theory of the Egyptian origin of tarot. So here we have Thomas Molleth, of whom he later says that he was the friend and revival of Attila. And in the last paragraph of this introduction, he describes himself as son and grandson of magicians and declares that he can command common spirits, foretell futures, read cards, observe the influence of the stars, discover hidden treasures, and perform thousands of other miracles, roundly controverting Attila's theory of the Egyptian origin of tarot cards. He pronounced himself by evocation as magician and cartomancer, compelled to speak the truth, and asks sarcastically. So this is one of those things where a buddy of mine, but the thing is that even here, in 1859, when we talk about the Egyptian tarot, this person, he can, and asks sarcastically how the ancient Egyptians could make cards when they had no paper but only papyrus, and why the Book of Thoth should have pages when their books had the form of scrolls. He conjectures instead that tarots came into existence at the same time as ordinary playing cards, which he supposes would have been in 1392. And so that's pretty close. But he nonetheless accepts Attila's account of the origins of cartomancy, which he says did not exist before 1750. So I thought that was interesting that even back then there were people questioning the Egyptian, using the same logic that I have, because yes, there was no paper. And if you've read any of the other books, I've got the History of the Occult Tarot, I've got some other books, and they go on to explain, simple that, and this book explains that a lot of the stuff de Gebelin came up with was before they even had the Rosetta Stone. So when he translated the different words and things like that, he was making it up. So he had like 9 volumes he had to fill up. So he used, he just made up a lot of stuff. But the good thing about that is that it also brought, I look at the tarot and I see something in there also. I don't need to have whether it comes down through the ages or not, it doesn't bother me one way or the other, because I still see this as I can read it like a book. And so we have Rohit 22. Hello, sir. Well, hello back, sir. How are you? So let's see here. And as we keep going through, Attila's final word. Okay, so here we go. The seeds of later development of the tradition founded by Attila were already present in his work. Attila was a professional fortune teller who wanted to be a magus, a professor of the high sciences. The obscurity and disorder of his writings made it impossible, however, that anyone should extract from them a coherent theory of magic. His work was plundered only to extract a technique of divination with the cards. His radical revision of the tarot pack had the effect that he failed to find a tradition of cartomancy by the use of tarot cards, as these were originally understood. It became a tradition of cartomancy with Egyptian tarots, which were nothing but a special form of pack, among several, devised specifically for fortune telling. Attila's version of the tarot pack underwent an autonomous evolution. The designers of its successors did not go back to the traditional cards that Attila had corrected. They appealed only to his interpretations or to their own imaginations when they wanted to give their designs a medieval or more recognizably Egyptian flavor. The Egyptian tarots therefore came to diverge ever further from traditional tarot cards, their connection which became almost impossible for anyone to discern who did not know the history of the matter. The diviner's art had ceased to be a mystery. It had degenerated into an agreeable pastime. So, basic gist is that he helped to popularize. But yeah, I mean, there are people I know that get a lot from the Egyptian tarot, from Atella's. I have not delved into it. Maybe one day I'll feel that strong desire, but I have not really felt that need yet. So, now we have the second founder, Levi. Éliphas Lévi. Real name, Alphonse Louis Constant. So, and yes, there is a historical importance here. So, I didn't highlight this part, but let's actually just take a look at this first paragraph where it says, "It seems unlikely that, but for Court de Gebelin, Attila would ever have." Okay. It seems unlikely that, but for Court de Gebelin, Attila would ever have thought of the tarot pack as the book of thought, or of using it for divination, let alone as a basis for elaborate occult theories. Conversely, had it not been for Attila, Court de Gebelin's speculations about the tarot would most likely have been forgotten, buried in the eighth large tomb of his unfinished treatise on the supposed ancient civilizations. For all his high-flown theories, Attila's main objective was cartomancy. The tradition founded by him lost its pretensions to be an aspect of high magic and petered out as a parlor entertainment. If there had been no new impetus, we should not today associate the tarot with the occult. A descendant of Attila's tarot pack would probably still be in existence, just as a cartomantic pack attributed to Mademoiselle Lenormand, just as the same pack from Mademoiselle Lenormand is still in existence. The pack might still be labeled the Egyptian Tarot, but it would be no more than just another set of fortune-telling cards, providing a diversion for a fete or or an amusement for the drawing room. Certainly Attila's writings, even less readable or capable of being taken seriously than Court de Gebelin's, would rest in the obscurity of oblivion. Not that no one after Court de Gebelin would have succumbed to the lure of deciphering the iconography of the tarot pack, as the symbolism, familiar at the time of the Renaissance, recedes from us. These images strike those who come across them as ever more perplexing. Here there are a few gripped by an entire desire to discover their interpretations. So this was just a kind of a throwaway line here, but I found this to be pretty important. As the symbolism familiar at the time of the Renaissance recedes from us, these images strike those who come across them as ever more perplexing. Yeah, this was there's a statue in Italy of a woman doing this, but we look at this and we see something's going on and we're not sure how to interpret it. Whereas for the Italians in the 14th, 15th, 13th century would absolutely understand what that means. So as time and distance and everything else we pull away, these things start to we start to interpret them with our own modern eyes. And so that's something, and that's one of the reasons why I love the history and going back, because I want to know what somebody would have seen in the original symbols, the original thoughts, instead of, somebody giving an impression and then another person writing a book on that impression, and then you have a game of telephone where it's like it has nothing to do with the original concept. I want to know what the original concept is, and that's why I do the history and stuff like that. So Levi, we cannot understand the man if we know nothing about his early life, but his influence on history of occultism, to use a term which he was one of the earliest to employ. So again, I want to emphasize that. But his influence on the history of occultism, to use a term which he was one of the earliest to employ, is due to his work during the second phase of his life, which may be dated from 1852 to his death in 1875. In 1852 or a little earlier, he became absorbed in the occult. And as a writer and a practitioner, he devoted the rest of his life to it. Believing that the Jews were the primary source of magical teaching, he Hebraized his name to Éliphas Lévi Zahed. I've heard that pronounced so many different ways, his name, and it's like, since I always read about it, I wonder what the true pronunciation is. Maybe somebody will post it somewhere. I always said Éliphas Lévi Zahed, but now I'm questioning myself. But the magic, okay, so it was under the appellation of Éliphas Levi, that he henceforward published his books and functioned as a mangus, a short, stocky figure. He assumed a quasi monastic, thank you, habit, and lived in an apartment cluttered with magical bric-a-brac. A writer on occult subjects, Levi earned great renown after a decade of his death. So not in his lifetime, as so many authors and artists and things like that. Although he had many contacts with celebrated literary figures by whom he was well regarded, his books enjoyed no more than a modest success during his lifetime. By the time of his death, he had been largely forgotten by all but a very few. Yet within circles interested in the occult, he had become a celebrity of the highest rank well before the century ended. So this is something that I found interesting. I think this is the part here. Yet throughout the period, the predominant version of magic had been what is known as the Western tradition, or more recently, the Western mysteries. The Western tradition of magic draws from Oriental religion. The Western tradition of magic draws neither from Oriental religion nor from the underground cults practiced or allegedly practiced by witches. It is essentially a legacy to us from the Renaissance. Its sources were older than the Renaissance, most of them far older, but as Anton Favre had observed, Favre had observed, it was in the Renaissance that the disparate sources began to synthesize into a unified body of occult scientists. The synthesis was not perfect. Thus, although Pico de Miradola introduced the Kabbalah to the Christian audience, and so they actually put all that stuff in the introduction. I read the introduction. They did all these little mini biographies and explaining the Kabbalah and stuff like that. So I didn't want to go into the Kabbalah and all that. I just wanted to know the history of the tarot and stuff like that, which is part of the Kabbalah and all that. But that introduction was dry. He was a fervent opponent of astrology as involving a denial of human free will. Even Cornelius Agrippa's Compendium of Magic, 1531, omitted alchemy, which for the most part remained isolated from other occult sciences. The advance of natural science rendered even less credible the theories underlying magic, which was driven to the intellectual margins and became more the province of the irrationalist, the eccentric, and the charlatan. So now they're just kind of like talking about, as people became more modern and stuff, magic, things like that got pushed down. And they're talking about how in the first half of the 19th century, high magic fell into decay. And how occultism was thus in a moribund condition when Levi started. And now we're talking about how it got... And yes, if that paragraph was not dry, I don't know what it is. But it's all important stuff to the history. You know. Occultism was thus the moribund condition when Levi started to revivify it by his books about it. The astonishing fact is that his work formed the narrow channel through which the whole Western tradition of magic flowed to the modern era. As the titles of his first two books on the subject indicate, Levi was an exponent of the high magic. What is high magic? Of which Levi wrote, as opposed to the lower forms of magic. In Richard Cavendish's, now this is interesting, so y'all can wake up on this part here. Some people may not know it. I'd heard this before, but I think this is something. What is the definition of high magic? In an attempt to gain so consummate an understanding of mastery of oneself and the environment as to transcend all human limitations and become superhuman and divine. I'm re-highlighting because my other highlighter had started dying. So, what is high magic then as compared to low magic? High magic is an attempt to gain so consummate an understanding and mastery of oneself and the environment as to transcend all human limitations and become superhuman or divine. Those who thus aspire by their own efforts to become like gods disdain that power to work miracles which alone interest the practitioners of low magic, though they do not deny that the power exists. Levi therefore differentiated himself as sharply as possible from the professional fortune tellers for whom he expressed contempt. He was concerned to expound a theory incorporating the work of all the Western writers, and this is an important thing here, on magic, constituting a complete worldview. So what's going to go in here is that, well, first off, we've learned that he wants to talk about high magic. He wants to differentiate between the cartomancers and the fortune tellers and things like that. He wants to elevate magic and explain that it's actually got a higher purpose. So, though he was not completely isolated as a writer on occult subjects, it was he who revived Western traditions of occultism and gave it a new impetus. It was not until after his death in 1880s that the revival acquired any great energy. When it did, it was from Levi's writing that it devotes first learned rudiments of high magic, and it was Levi who appeared to all of them to be the great master. So, once he died, people were finding his writings, and they were experiencing some revelations. They were finding a path. At first glance at his books may render this mysterious. The style is florid and bombastic. The scholarship is slapdash. The doctrine expounded is at best cloudy. How could writing such as this have so profound an impact? Levi was able to revivify occultism because he was not patently eccentric, fanatical, or unbalanced, nor associated with any esoteric, let alone disreputable groups. He had no interest in founding or joining secret orders purporting to transmit to their members a closely guarded wisdom handed down to the initiates through the ages and known only to them, nor did he recommend his readers to join them. Quite the contrary, he professed to explain all and to reveal all. So, why did it become popular? Because he was going to show how to obtain and grow from the high magic, and you didn't need to have all these grades. You didn't need to have initiations. It came down to study. He did at one time become a Freemason indeed, but rapidly became dissatisfied with the craft and soon abandoned it. His writing was undemanding. Moreover, at least on the surface, his readers were not asked to memorize complex tables of correspondences or master any intricate theories. No obligation was laid on them to engage in an austere self-discipline, save temporarily if they wanted to engage in one of the magical practices Levi described. They were called on neither to give up nor adopt their Christian beliefs and practices. To anyone thirsty for occult knowledge, Levi's work was a gushing spring in a dry land, and he had no rival. Nothing was being written that could compete with his books. Those of Paul Christians were far too idiosyncratic to do so, and those of Henry Dulwich too obviously mediocre, suffused with magical symbolism and allusions. But Levi's writings had little appeal to the rational minds or to those well informed about the history of science, but they slacked the thirst for the occult as nothing else at the time could do. So, and how did he do this? This is an interesting part. Can you get, so we have Serial 24 Killer. Hello, and hello, Carlos. So, Serial, can I get on the list? you're on my list. I'm not sure what that means, but you're now on my list. Just to let people on Twitch know, this is actually streaming also on YouTube. If you go to the YouTube and you just type in MyTarot.org, hit enter, you'll see my channel, and it's live streaming there, and that is where you can contact me, you can subscribe. Please subscribe. There's a button right here. Anybody who's watching. So everybody on Twitch, if you go there, that's where I actually read the comments, and that's where all that other wonderful stuff is, etc., etc. So I'm going to read one last part here, and then I'm going to call it a day. But this is an important section here. So Levi. Oh, here we go. Levi completed the task begun in the Renaissance of synthesizing the various ingredients of Western tradition of magic. It was he who finally made it a single tradition. Okay? There was little originality in his ideas, but his very lack of originality was itself a strength. If he had had any radical, unfamiliar thesis to propound, he would to that extent have fallen short of the aim of making known an ancient tradition of which the public at large was ignorant. He did not present one or another branch of occult science, say astrology or Kabbalah. A second reason for success was that he expounded it all. He never wrote a treatise on the Hermetic books, on the Kabbalah, or on the treaty. He did not even expound Siratim, the branches of the high magic of which he wrote, with separate chapters or sections on the diverse occult sciences and doctrines. He made a synthesis. In his writings, the Kabbalah, alchemy, Hermeticism, astrology, magnetism, and even a little black magic from the grimoires are inextricably intertwined. That's what makes him interesting, is the fact that he took all these things, instead of saying, you know, you had your astrologers and you had people who studied the Kabbalah or alchemy. And he's saying that all these are all part of a greater magic. And that's something nobody else had quite explained. So he goes on to say you could learn about all of magic from reading Levi. However, selectively you tried to read him, you could not learn about anything less than all of it. Among the diverse ingredients forming the mishmash that constituted Levi's magical system was the tarot. This was not, of course, wholly original. Attila had placed it in the center of his theory of the high sciences, and it was surely his eccentric writings that put it into Levi's head to incorporate the tarot into his magic. The students of the occult science in the Renaissance, on the other hand, would have been astonished to see a pack of cards elevated to the rank of a fundamental source of magic imagery. So the alchemists, the astrologers, would have been astonished that somebody would say, you're going to take a game that sailors are playing out on the docks right now, and you're going to say that this constitutes an integral part of the high magics. So as it goes on, Attila had left those who came after him and wished so to elevate the tarot as an inescapable choice. They could not accept his thorough reordering of the trumps and replacement of certain of the trump subjects, but only at the price of appearing as his followers, or they could retain their traditional order and traditional subjects, but only by repudiating his ideas altogether. So Levi took the second course. It was not only that he had no desire to figure as anyone's follower, and especially not that of an uneducated tradesman who could not even write decent French. It was that the tradition Attila had founded had dwindled into a mere technique of cartomancy. Despite his high-flown theories, Attila had remained a professional fortune-teller. Cartomancy had undisguisedly been the ultimate aim of his theorizing, and the tradition he had founded had driven ever more determinedly in that direction, shedding the theories as it did so. So for Levi, however, the tarot was primarily a source of magical symbolism. its use as an instrument of divination a mere distraction. So divination with the tarot was just a distraction. If the tarot was to be successfully incorporated into the theory of high magic, it must therefore be wrest from the tradition of Atella. Its Egyptian version, used by all the contemporary cartomancers, must be replaced by a more traditional one. The traditional order of the trumps must be restored, and likewise all traditional images. These images could not be allowed to have been formed in detail by the card makers, but not so far as to change the subjects depicted or rendered a traditional pack of cards unusual for the occult purposes. So the traditional form of the tarot pack that Levi knew was the Tarot de Marseille. The pattern for it, that had been standard in France for at least 2 centuries. Although he, like Atella, accused the card makers of ignorant mistakes, his conception of the designs of the tarot cards was based on the Tarot de Marseille, which, in accordance with the terminology used in France at the time, he called the Italian tarot. He knew of the German, that is, French-suited tarot, but not of any other patterns with the original Italian suits. It was the order of the trumps in the Tarot de Marseille different. It was the order of the trumps in the Tarot de Marseille different from some of the patterns for that the tarot pack that Levi took to be the order of the tarot trumps. It was designs of the trumps in the Tarot de Marseille likewise different from those of other patterns that he lightly modified to accord his interpretations. So this has been going on for more than an hour, and I do not want to bore people any more than I have to. So I'm going to do part 3, and I'm going to start it on page 171. So we've covered quite a lot here, actually, going through Atella, and now looking at Éliphas Lévi. So when we go on, we're going to see how Atella, how Levi had radically just distanced himself as far from Atella as he possibly could, and it goes into some of the different. It's going to go into his Levi's biography. So here it's just talking about his magic, but the biography is yet to come about Levi. So with that, I'm going to call it a day. I want to thank everybody here so far, and stay tuned. Anybody who's interested, I understand you're interested in reading. Go to the YouTube page. There you're going to see links to the Facebook page. And if you hang out on Facebook, help people. If you answer questions, ask questions, anything for yourself to grow and to help other people grow. If you do that, I will even give readings for free. I can say that because most people don't want to do that, and so I don't have to give a whole lot of readings. But if you're helping somebody, I will gladly give readings for free. So, MyTarot.org, MyTarot.org, and the YouTube search. Look for the MyTarot.org. And again, right there, subscribe. Show your appreciations if you enjoyed. If you want more or you want different subjects, please feel free to let me know what your interests are. I have over 200 videos there. I also do a morning meditation Monday through Friday, 7:15 Eastern Standard. And so, thank you very, very much for everything, for the people that have hung around. Wow. We've got people that have stayed this whole time, especially on Twitch. Thanks a lot, and I will be talking to my camera later. Have an amazing day, have an amazing week, all that other wonderful stuff, and thank you so much.